For 1,500 years, a secret was written inside their genes. No one could read it. The samurai have always stood as the purest symbol of Japan, warriors shaped by an ancient, isolated people, a culture untouched by the outside world. Their armor, their code of honor, their deadly skill with the blade, all of it seemed to grow from one single Japanese root. But DNA is now telling a completely different story, a story of a 300-year mystery, of a third ancestry that appeared suddenly inside Japan's ruling class, of genetic links stretching far beyond the islands, across the sea, across the continent, and deep into the heart of the Eurasian steppe. And what scientists found buried inside samurai DNA changes everything you thought you knew about Japan's most legendary warriors. Long before the first samurai ever drew a sword, Japan belonged to a very different world. The earliest known inhabitants of the islands were the Jomon people, hunter-gatherers who lived in Japan for more than 10,000 years. They fished the coasts, hunted in dense forests, and created some of the world's oldest pottery. Genetically, they were deeply distinct, separated from mainland populations for thousands of years. For millennia, they were Japan. Then, around 2,300 years ago, a second wave arrived. These were the Yayoi migrants moving through the Korean peninsula. They brought rice farming, metal tools, and new forms of social hierarchy. Their DNA was closer to populations from Korea and eastern China than to the Jomon. Over centuries, they spread across the islands, mixing with local groups and transforming society entirely. But this was only the beginning of the changes coming to Japan. Modern Japanese people today still carry both Jomon and Yayoi ancestry. But here is where the mystery begins. Between the 3rd and 6th centuries, during what historians call the Kofun period, something changed again, and for a long time, nobody knew exactly what. This era is famous for its massive burial mounds, some shaped like keyholes, built for powerful elites. Inside were weapons, armor, mirrors, and horse gear. Suddenly, Japan had a ruling class that looked more militarized, more connected to the mainland, and more politically centralized than anything seen before. For generations, historians debated the same question. Was this just cultural influence flowing in from outside, or did new people actually arrive and take power? Ancient DNA has now answered that question. And the answer points to something no one fully expected. Genetic studies reveal a third major ancestral component entering Japan during this period, distinct from both the Jomon and the Yayoi. Researchers now call this the Kofun ancestry. The warrior elite of early Japan may have descended in part from this third wave, migrants whose arrival reshaped the islands and laid the foundation for the future samurai class. These Kofun-era individuals show genetic ties to populations on the East Asian mainland, particularly regions connected to Korea and northern China. This was not just trade. It was not just ideas crossing the water. It was people, families, lineages, elites moving across the sea and embedding themselves in positions of power. And with them, they brought something else, something that would define the samurai forever, and something that changed the entire nature of war in Japan. Before these centuries, horses were rare in Japan. After this third wave arrived, that changed completely. Mounted warfare began transforming the nature of combat across the islands. Armor styles changed, weapons changed, military tactics evolved. Mounted archers, armored riders, and clan-based warrior elites began dominating regional power struggles. Over time, these mounted fighters would evolve into the class the world now calls samurai. But the horse connection opens an even bigger door, because mounted warrior culture did not begin in Japan. It spread across Eurasia from the great grasslands of the steppe, the same vast belt of territory that once gave rise to nomadic warrior confederations like the Scythians, and centuries later, the Huns. With genetic and cultural signals suggest the military traditions shaping early samurai elites were part of a far wider Eurasian pattern, and that pattern connects Japan to a world much larger than its islands. By the Heian period, starting in the late 700s, Japan's imperial court in Kyoto still held symbolic authority. But real power in the provinces depended on armed clans. Families like the Taira and Minamoto built private armies, defended estates, and fought rival groups for control. These provincial warriors, bound by loyalty and trained in mounted combat, became the backbone of the samurai. As samurai power expanded, Especially during the Kamakura and Muromachi periods, they became a hereditary class. Status was passed through bloodlines. Genealogies were guarded like treasure. Clans claimed descent from noble houses, imperial branches, even divine ancestors. But biology tells a more complex story than family legends ever did, because what was actually happening inside these bloodlines was something their clan records never recorded, and it cuts right to the heart of who the samurai really were. These warrior families did not live in isolation. They formed alliances, arranged marriages, adopted heirs, and absorbed talented fighters from outside their original lineages. Over generations, their gene pool reflected the broader population shifts already reshaping Japan, including the legacy of that Kofun third wave. The samurai were not the frozen descendants of a single ancient tribe. They were the living result of centuries of migration, intermarriage, and elite mixing. Their DNA carried layers of Japan's hidden population history. Even physical anthropology supports this slow blending. Skeletal remains from different periods show gradual shifts in stature and facial structure, consistent with increasing mainland East Asian influence layered on top of older Jomon-derived traits. The physical evidence and the genetic evidence were pointing in the same direction, and together they were dismantling one of the most powerful myths in Japanese history. By the time of the Tokugawa shogunate, when samurai ruled a rigid social order from the 1600s to the 1800s, they were seen as the pure warrior class of Japan. Swords at their sides, topknots marking their status, they stood above farmers, artisans, and merchants in every aspect of society. But genetically, they were the heirs of multiple migrations. Jomon roots, Yayoi farmers, was the later Kofun ancestry tied to elite clans and expanding military culture. The DNA trail reveals that the samurai were not born from isolation. They were born from ancient globalization, a fusion of island and mainland blood that powered the rise of Japan's most iconic warriors. The purity they projected was real in culture, but in ancestry, it was far more complicated than anyone standing beneath their rule could have imagined. So were the samurai Japanese. Culturally, absolutely. They spoke the language, served Japanese lords, followed codes that evolved on Japanese soil, and shaped the nation's history in ways that still echo today. But if we imagine Japanese as a single unmixed lineage, stretching unchanged into the distant past, the science says otherwise. Japan was built in layers: hunter-gatherers, rice farmers, migrant elites, warrior clans. Each wave left a mark, not by replacing what came before, but by blending with it and rising into new roles. The samurai, symbols of loyalty, discipline, and identity, are proof that nations are not forged from purity. They are forged from mixture. And the deeper you look into that mixture, the more a hidden story begins to take shape. One that no genealogy record, no clan scroll, and no imperial document ever captured. Their armor may have been lacquered in Japanese style, their swords forged in Japanese fire. But the ancestry in their veins connected them to a much wider human story. People crossing seas, bringing horses, new weapons, new genes, and reshaping a civilization from the inside out. The legend of the samurai does not become weaker when we learn this. It becomes bigger. Because instead of a closed story of isolation, we see an epic of movement, adaptation, and transformation. A warrior class born from centuries of hidden connections, written quietly into their DNA, and carried forward for 1,500 years without anyone knowing what those genes were actually saying. That secret is only now being fully understood. And if this is what DNA reveals about Japan's most iconic warriors, the questions it raises about other civilizations run even deeper.